Supercell has killed many games, probably way more than we'll ever know. But luckily, some of these games actually went far enough for us to play and get to experience before they were deleted. Today, we're taking a look at every Supercell game that was once available, whether that be through a soft launch, private beta, and even global launches, but were later discontinued.
Let's do this.
Gunshine.
How do you do? Talk to you later.
Gunshine, or Gunshine.net, which entered a private beta in February 2011, was Supercell's first game. It was a real-time MMORPG, and it was only available on PC, starting out on Facebook. Basically, you had to fight against zombie invasions on an island run by a mega corporation, and you could create and customize characters with different classes. It was your typical MMORPG of the time that you could play with your friends or go solo, and apparently it was popular. After it went global during the summer of 2011, it had 500,000 players at its peak. Eventually, Gunshine was rebranded as Zombies Online, which probably made more sense. And it was around this time Supercell was planning to work on a mobile and tablet version of Gunshine. However, with a decreasing player count and difficulties making a solid mobile port, they ultimately decided to move on from Gunshine and focus their efforts on games built for mobile. The servers for Gunshine were officially shut down on November 30th, 2012. Pets vs. Orcs. This was Supercell's first mobile game launched in January 27th, 2012. It was essentially a base builder. You built a town, you could build farms, mines, mills, and pet houses. These pet houses were like your barracks in this game where you trained your pets. The main goal was to build up your town to defend it from orcs. You could also go out and attack orcs in single player maps to save kittens. Yes, so the main goal was to save kittens. I mean, it looked pretty sweet and it had a lot of potential, but it was killed off early as the game wasn't exactly what the team imagined it to be. As quoted by the CEO, if it starts to feel like the game isn't going to work or isn't fun enough, it's usually a sign that you should have already killed it. Shortly after, the game was pulled from the App Store sometime in February. Yes, this game was only available for a little over a month. Talk about rare Supercell games. Battle Buddies. Battle Buddies was Supercell's second mobile game to make it out to players. It was soft launched before Clash of Clans in March 31st, 2012 for iOS and only in Canada. Essentially, it was a PvP turn-based tactical shooting game where you would take turns moving your character or doing different actions such as shooting or collecting loot. The goal was to clear the stage, but it was easier said than done, which was the point of the game. It was fun. This was single player and multiplayer as well, so you could either control all 5 buddies on the map or take turns with someone online and compete with them. There was also a shop to buy a handful of items and a full-blown skill system where you could unlock weapons and such. Overall, it looked like a neat game, but Battle Buddies would eventually be killed due to 2 reasons: a lack of player interest and poor monetization. So it never moved out of beta and it was shut down later in 2012. Spooky Pop. Spooky Pop was released in December of 2014. It was a puzzle game in the likeness of games such as Puzzles and Dragons, where you match colors, and in doing so, something happens, which in this case, you'd attack an enemy and eventually finish the wave. Right out the gate, Spooky Pop had some challenges. It wasn't very popular. Players saw this and just thought, there goes Supercell again, trying to hop on the bandwagon of whatever's popular in the App Store. And seeing as the App Store was flooded with these sort of games, it's easy to see why it failed to gain much attention. It seemed like a fun game, but it's kind of like someone trying to release another Battle Royale game in 2025, you know? It's just been done too many times, it's unoriginal. On February 9th, 2015, the app was removed from the App Store. Players could still log on and play, but they'd get a message that the game was getting shut down, and that it did on March 10th, 2015. Supercell's decision to shut down Spooky Pop was primarily due to the game's lack of long-term appeal and its failure to stand out in the crowded puzzle game genre. Smashland. Smashland was soft launched on March 31st, 2015 in Canada and Australia. This was another puzzle type game, and this time it was similar to the game Pool, where you have to hit something and it bounces off of things. Here you had to hit enemies, and the goal was to find and collect lost treasures and heroes. This game was not unique. It was based on a Japanese game called Monster Strike, but it still had that Supercell touch, if you catch my drift. Unfortunately though, Smashland was seen as just too simple and not interesting enough to play long term. On July 1st of 2015, Supercell announced that it would end the development for Smashland, and on September 1st, the servers were shut down. But at least Smashland would be attributed to great things. Well, maybe not today in 2025, but you be the judge of that. On August 2022, Darian, the community manager of Clash of Clans at the time, would say the following: "It was the killing of Smashland that enabled Clash Royale's growth." Rush Wars. Rush Wars was beta launched on August 26, 2019 in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. I was fortunate enough to participate in the launch of the game. I was flown out to Helsinki where I got to play it and give my terrible feedback. I thought it was pretty fun, I don't know, a little boring at times. Now, Rush Wars was essentially a PvP strategy game where you assemble your squad and go up against another player trying to either defend your side or take over their side. Most of the planning took place before the match started, and you could periodically deploy troops and artillery to help you out. The game had a lot in common with Boom Beach, if you ever played that. It also had some other fun features and things to do. It was pretty sweet. However, after Supercell gathered enough community feedback, it was announced that they'd no longer continue the beta. The main problem being that they couldn't figure out how to make the game non-repetitive and as fun as they like, which goes against their motto of making games that be played and remembered forever. This game would be remembered for like, 2 months? No, it wasn't that bad. But yeah, most players just stopped playing after the first week. It was a serious problem. The beta would continue to run until November 30th, 2019, and on that day, these servers shut down. Hayday Pop. Hayday Pop was released in March of 2020. If you've ever played games like Gardenscape or Farmscape, Hayday Pop was basically that, but in the Hayday world. You essentially did the old color matching puzzle stuff, and in doing so, you could build up a village over time. Now, I've seen my wife play games like these, so I know how addictive they can get, and Hayday Pop looked intriguing. However, Supercell was making the exact same mistake they had done with Spooky Pop and Smashland, entering a genre that was already saturated and dominated by already insanely popular games. Unfortunately, because of this, Supercell failed to attract much interest, no matter how unique they made their game. On November 29, 2020, it was announced that they put out one final update before closing the servers, which was scheduled for February 1st, 2021. Everdale. Everdale actually had 2 launches, the first one being in September 2020 under the name Valleys and Villages. Back then, the developers were listed as Osmium Interactive, but we now know that that was Supercell. They wanted to test the game with fresh players who wanted to play the game because it looked interesting rather than because it was made by Supercell. The second launch was in August 23rd, 2021, and this time it was renamed to Everdale and published by Supercell. So anyway, Everdale was basically a village builder. You harvested and sold resources, built structures, traded, and did quests. It was really fun, and for a minute there I was actually addicted to this. There was a lot to do, and I don't know, I just love these kind of games. It also had a bit of management sim mechanics, you know. Yeah. Sadly, a little over a year later, on October 3rd, 2022, they announced these servers would shut down on the 31st. The reason was basically the same as every other game, just that it didn't meet their expectations. However, the story doesn't end there. In January 2023, a company by the name Metacore acquired the Everdale IP from Supercell. For a while, they were working on the game to eventually release it, but unfortunately, nothing came out of it. In September 18th, 2024, it was announced that they too decided to discontinue Everdale. Clash Quest. Clash Quest was soft launched on April 6, 2021 in several countries on both iOS and Android. It was one of 3 new Clash games that Supercell had announced. The hype was real. So Clash Quest was a turn-based strategy game with a bit of RPG and puzzle mechanics. You essentially had to use the characters on the board to defeat multiple stages of enemies. The strategic part was that you only had a limited number of characters that would cycle, and if you ran out, you lost the match. At times it could get difficult, but that's what made it fun. I never played Clash Quest, but it looked like a blast. However, in August 16th, 2022, Supercell announced that they were going to discontinue the development of Clash Quest. The 2 main reasons being that even after major overhauls to the game, it wasn't engaging enough for the existing audience, aka it got boring over time. And the other reason was that the genre was simply way too saturated to stand out. On October 28th, a little over a month after the announcement, these servers were officially shut down. Clash Mini. Clash Mini was soft-launched on November 8th, 2021 in several countries on iOS and Android. Clash Mini fell into a genre known as auto chess. If you've ever played games like King God Castle, Clash Mini was very similar to that. Basically, you had a board and you could deploy minis on there. You had a limited number of elixirs, so strategizing on how to beat a level or player was the goal. And the mechanics were pretty straightforward. It was one of those games that was easy to get into but hard to master. However, Clash Mini was struggling to attract new players. Its retention was also fairly low, and that was largely due to the game's repetitiveness. Players were getting bored too quick. On the 13th of March 2024, Supercell announced that it was discontinuing the development of Clash Mini, and on April 25th, the servers would shut down. Interestingly though, Clash Mini is coming back. In late 2024, Supercell confirmed that it was being added to Clash Royale in June 2025 as a brand new game mode. Whether it's gonna be delayed or not, we'll have to see, but so far, this is the only game in the video that died and is confirmed to be coming back. Boom Beach Frontlines. Alright, Boom Beach Frontlines wasn't made by Supercell, it was actually developed by a Supercell-backed company called Space Ape Games, but it's interesting to note that Supercell owns a majority of Space Ape, which is probably why BeatStar, a Space Ape game, has Supercell ID, and so did Boom Beach Frontlines, which by the way is using Supercell's IP of Boom Beach, so I thought it was worth including here today. It's basically a Supercell game. So Boom Beach Frontlines was soft launched in October 2019. It was a strategic 9v9 multiplayer game where you do different things like controlling an area or capturing the flag. It was very much like if Boom Beach and Brawl Stars made a game together. It was very fun, and at one point I even bought the season pass for it. It was pretty fun, I don't know. The game had a lot of potential and I was rooting for it. But unfortunately, on November 28th, 2022, it was announced that Boom Beach Frontlines was ending its development with the same vague response of not meeting expectations. The game was still playable for a few weeks, but on January 16th, 2023, the servers would shut down. Clash Heroes. Clash Heroes was only available through a few limited playtests, the first one being in early 2022, which we'll use for chronological reasons. Clash Heroes was described as a single-player action RPG, though you could play with your friends, but there was no PvP. It was kind of like Minecraft Dungeons where you go out and complete quests, like defeat bosses together. The mechanics were very simple. If I could compare it to anything, it was kind of like if Brawl Stars had a dungeon game mode. I don't know why I'm comparing everything to the Brawl Stars. However, on June 24th, 2024, it was announced that Clash Heroes was ending development, and instead they were making another game under the codename Project Rise, which was a multiplayer action RPG roguelite. Developers stated that some visual elements and assets were from Clash Heroes, but it's a brand new game otherwise, that's built from the ground up. So even though Clash Heroes is no more, a part of it still lives on in Project Rise, which hopefully comes out one day. Project Rise already had 2 alpha tests and it looks pretty promising. Flood Rush. Flood Rush went into a beta test on May 29th through June 7th, 2023, available in several countries but only on Android. The game was pretty simple to understand, but honestly it's probably easier to compare to Squad Busters. You're dropped on this map that is flooding, and you build up your squad led by a seeker, kind of like a hero, and you fight for treasure and victory. The difference between Squad Busters and Flood Rush was mostly the way you deployed cards with mana and finding the cards in chests and stuff like that. And the fact that it was a tap to move, there was no joystick in this game. Of course, this was an entirely different game on its own with many unique features and mechanics. But on August 23rd, 2023, it was announced that Flood Rush was ending development. The reason for this decision was that many players found the game a bit challenging to enjoy as the developers had designed it. Basically, people didn't really find it all that fun. Supercell thought that in order to implement all of the feedback and changes that were necessary, they would have to make an entirely different game, and that's not what they wanted to do. So instead, they killed it. So yeah, that is every Supercell game that was killed. There is another game that is not out yet, Boat Game. It did have a pre-alpha test and it does look promising, but it's unknown what will happen. It's still too early to tell. It's barely even a thing. I also didn't mention games that never came out like Magic and Tower, both from 2012. It's simply because we don't have any information on them other than their code names. But anyway, that wraps up today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed. But hey, before you go, YouTube thinks you'll like this next video, and I think you will too. So why don't you check it out? As always, have a gaming out. Peace.